Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So for those who are new, we do have a lot of ritual in this tradition, but it's best to frame it and think of it as a technology of the heart. There's a Jungian substrate to the psyche that speaks in the language of embodiment, story, and ritual, and we leverage those to orient the heart. So when we bow to this Buddha image, it is just a statue on one level, but it's representative of our highest aspirations for awakening. And whenever we engage in these rituals, there's no pressure at all, although one member of the community recently noted that we might as well say, no pressure to bow, except for the 70 people all bowing around you. So, but genuinely, no pressure. We put out a list of New Year's adhitanas for people, determinations, ways we can orient our practice this coming year, each of us, and had them dedicated to Ayananda Bodhi and Ajahn Sona this year. And we linked to it in the recent newsletter. And reading through it, these beautiful aspirations, may I align my life with the Dhamma as much as I can. May I do 28 prostrations every morning. May I receive each moment as a gift. And then at the very end, number 50, was whenever I put a hard candy in my mouth, may I suck it until it's all the way gone instead of biting it and eating it right away. And I thought of all the adhitanas on this list, that might be one of the hardest actually. And it speaks to this beautiful dichotomy in Buddhism. I think any rich spiritual paradigm is wound with paradox. And the Buddha articulated this paradox of practice better than, it's the Buddha. So he articulated it by speaking of two levels of right view, samaditthi. And what is transcendent right view? This is dukkha, this is the cause of dukkha, this is the cessation of dukkha, this is the path to the cessation of dukkha, of stress, of suffering. The Four Noble Truths, transcendent view and frame we apply to every moment to allow us to orient towards and comprehend that splinter of entropy which most of us spend our entire lives running from, dukkha. Not the suffering of the changeability of circumstance and the imperfection of this conditioned realm. Those are givens, and even an enlightened being will feel those. But the second arrow that we shoot ourselves with, the second layer of dukkha, the becoming drunk on greed, on hatred, the buying into this conditioned realm as a source of happiness, the feeding off of those around us, this is what we let go of. And the practice can be seen as a spiral staircase moving up towards transcendence in ever-widening spirals and down into humility. Deeper and deeper we understand what dukkha means, and we stop tying our hearts to the world such that they break when the world breaks. We move from the energy of feeding off of the world like fire bound to fuel. This is an analogy the Buddha used often, to the energy of light and blessing. Because it is impossible to love something at the same moment that you're feeding off of it. And this does not mean we retreat into a cold blankness. It does not even necessarily mean we ordain. It just means we recognize that we can move through the world as a gift and lightly, We can stop expecting so much from human life. We expect so much from it. But spouses change, kids go wild, parents are imperfect. And we can only expect so much. But if it's used as a path of practice, it becomes utterly blessed. This is how we bless a life. There's the wonderful Rabindranath Tagore quote, "I dreamt that life was a joy. I woke and found that life was a duty. I acted, and behold, duty was a joy." And this is how we apply the Four Noble Truths, is seeing that we can let go of our feeding off of others and move towards an energy of blessing. And alongside this, the most simple of paradigms, the most simple way to have a place for our heart to orient towards dukkha, the Buddha held up mundane right view. And what is mundane right view? Mundane right view is there is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. There is the result of good and bad actions. There is mother and father. There is this world and the next world. There is spontaneously reborn beings. There are samanas and contemplatives who have, faring rightly and practicing rightly, achieved nibbana and declare it here and now. And this framework is all about duty, the conditioned realm, the care we take with every action, the efficacy of karma, the debt of gratitude we owe a parent. There is the result of good and bad actions. So instead of just releasing into a nebulous idea of all we're doing is looking at dukkha and the lack of dukkha, arising and ceasing with transcendent, we hold it alongside this careful attention to the conditioned realm. How do we not chew the hard candy? How do we close the cupboards as carefully as we can? How do we honor our relationships? There's another great quote about duty, actually, I'd forgotten, a similar. C.S. Lewis said, "If you search for truth, you may find comfort in the end. But if you search just for comfort, you will only get wishful thinking and soft suds in the present and despair in the end." I really like that one. But it's like depth perception, is we hold these two views in mind at the same time, and somehow this allows our life to have depth, and somehow they work together, this paradox where the more refined a citta, a heart, becomes, the more the smallest deviations from what is true path become apparent and viscerally apparent. After time of practice, right and wrong become less relevant, but the metrics of beautiful and unbeautiful become extremely relevant, trivial and non-trivial. We feel it when we've exaggerated in our speech, when we've had that slight harshness. And this can make us feel sometimes like practice isn't progressing. I keep slipping up. But then we realize that this spiral staircase up, it's a gradual skimming off the surface. The Buddha compared it to refining gold. He said, first, one gets rid of the coarse defilements like sand or grit out of gold, unwholesome actions of body, speech, and mind. Then one lets go of the subtle defilements, unwholesome intentions, the intentions for sensuality, for ill will, for harmfulness. And finally, just as the goldsmith would blow off the fine dust, even so, a practitioner intent on heightened mind cleanses their mind of the subtlest defilements, thoughts of one's homeland, thoughts of one's family, thoughts of not wanting to be despised. And the word there for homeland, actually, I'm translating, or family, is vana, or color. So think of your tribe, red, blue, Democrat, Republican, whatever you want, but refining even those. And it's a gift because you find that if we were forced to confront our whole defilement, that whole constellation all at once, it would be too much. And so the Dhamma gives us a chance to refine time and again. We circle back to these same patterns, and what you don't see often is they are getting softer. They are getting more gentle. And the clockwork of suffering still turns in us, but it's surrounded by such space. We begin to notice that though we usually track our lives on an XY axis of ascent and descent, improvement and, disprovement? Okay, yeah, Dharma talk. We begin to move through a Z-axis of a whole different strata of being, and things shift radically, but much more in a different way than we would expect. The life can look the same on the surface. Those duties you're doing, that first noble truth, your duties to your partner, your spouse, your job, your family, they can look the same. But because you're holding the depth perception, because you're applying the Four Noble Truths, each thing can be imbued with such intention and grace and path. A middle-class, well-intentioned life can become so much more. And not that every life is a middle-class, well-intentioned life, but I think many of the people sitting in this room fall in that category. And Ajahn Chah said that after a while, a minor offense in the Vinaya, dukkha we call it, feels like a parajika, which is the heaviest offense. Strangely enough, this is the paradox, is as the heart refines into this space of emptiness, each mar, each stain becomes so viscerally felt. And this is a gift because it lets us refine the clean cloth. There's a wonderful sutta called the Thief of a Scent, where a bhikkhu, a monk, is smelling a flower, and a deva comes down and admonishes him, "Why are you stealing that scent?" And he says, "Why are you admonishing me? There's people doing far worse things out there." And the deva says, "Why would I bother with a soiled child's diaper? You are a clean cloth," which is quite a simile. And the bhikkhu says, "Thank you, you are right. Please admonish me if I do so again." And the deva says, "What am I, your servant?" And he says, sorry. And it's a great exchange. And what does he say? "Why would I bother with someone bent on cruelty? It is you, sensitive to the slightest fault, intent on purity, who I should admonish." And we talked to there's a group of monks out on Vashon Island. They have a lot more hair than us, a lot more beards, but they're wonderful practitioners. And one, Father Nicodemus, said after a while, the saints, they might forget to pass the salt to someone. And for them, it's this huge thing. It's this huge splinter. And it really is. Like for them, that's where their practice is. And it's true. We can forgive ourselves for these things, but to acknowledge that as the mind refines into emptiness, action becomes precise, pristine. And this is the trend, this is the beauty in the final epithet of the Buddha, the Tathagata, which means thus come or thus gone. It can be translated as Tathagata, which means thus come, or Tathagata, thus gone. So one gone to thusness or come to thusness. And in his epithet, we also speak about the Buddha perfect in conduct and understanding. And this matches the Christian concept of transcendence and immanence, that as you move up on that spiral staircase, you move down into a care with every action. I'm reminded of one practitioner in this community who made the determination to just start closing every cupboard as quietly as he could. And what would it mean to take that sort of care? There's a movie that I saw when I was a layman. We can't watch them anymore. But there's this disciple who's challenged by his samurai master. I did watch samurai movies, at least this one. And the samurai master says, "Let us have a practice duel." And the student says, "I'm saving my energy for the important battles." And the master says, "There are no unimportant or important battles. All actions are equally important." What would it mean to really hold that, to know that every action can be imbued with this depth perception of transcendent and mundane? We were at a retreat at Cloud Mountain last weekend, and someone asked, how do we hold identity and the concept of privilege? And this is definitely a hot topic, and I want to take care with speaking about it. But it is worth speaking to, with the caveat that I have an unbelievable amount of privilege as a white male. But the idea, first, that the worst excesses of, we talk about, the worst excesses of the kind of divisions perforating society right now, I think much of it can be laid at the feet of the fact that so many now, the spiritual canopy we had has been left in tatters. And for so many, without that, where do we steer the heart? And ideologies are crippled religions. They limp along and give a sense of cohesion and purpose, but they lack the richness of a true spiritual path. And this is the beauty of these teachings, the Buddhist teachings, is they inoculate against the worst excesses of that division, because you give people a foundation that is true and palatable for the modern heart and powerful. And we ground in that. And then we can approach these conversations with wisdom. And similarly, in overlaying that question onto this idea of transcendent and mundane right view, that which is beyond the conditioned realm and that which pays utter and careful attention to it, we can acknowledge and understand both perspectives here. The fact that we live in a conditioned realm and there are echoes of old patterns, institutional violence, there's privilege and lack of privilege, there are things to be remedied in the world and given careful and caring energy to. And this is utterly and very important. We acknowledging this. And there is that which is beyond. There is a place in society also for shared humanity and really leaning into and speaking to that. And if these two paradigms are held in the correct positioning, where shared humanity is at the apex, and then that view and those decisions are informed and carefully touched by this consideration of the conditioned realm of identity, of all the conditions which we come into life with, then we can hold this beautifully. And to acknowledge that these, this is, I think, one place that the Buddhist world and the emerging Buddhist culture really can learn a great deal from the Christians in the sense of service and giving. Addressing those ills that we do see in the world. Ajahn Kovilo and I are part of the Buddhist Global Relief Council with Bhikkhu Bodhi. We have people starting various groups in the wider Clear Mountain community dedicated towards accommodating and welcoming a wide variety of people, and these are just utterly essential. And I think it's beautiful also to bring to bear the Buddha's teachings that really allow us to bridge all gaps. And there's one amazing sutta called the Dukkha Sutta and the Sukkata Sutta, where he says, when you see someone fallen on misfortune, struggling, you should think, even I, in the course of this long, long wandering on, have experienced just this sort of thing. And when you see someone come on good conditions, happy, blessed, you should think, even I, in the course of this long, long wandering on, have experienced just this sort of thing. And this massive equalization where in this idea of samsaric rebirth, and even if you do not believe in multiple lives, which is just fine, this idea that we've all touched these patterns, we all have these things in us, where in the Buddhist conception, we've all been each other's mothers and sisters and brothers and sons and family and enemies and friends. And how if you touch that truth correctly, what comes is not a coldness or stepping back, but a sense first of just a widening of gaze to hold the whole world in it. People ask about ordaining and how we could give up love, but we've never given up love. Look at this. We're surrounded by love. What this allows you to do, though, is stop your attention from being eclipsed on a certain being, say a loved one or something, and expand out. And similarly, when you see all beings, as in Thailand they refer to people who come to the monastery as brothers and sisters in birth, aging, and death, there's a beauty of that, in that, a hearteningness. And honestly, often with those we're closest to, these are the people, strangely enough, it's hardest to kindle that sense of true liberative love. And often the correct motion of the heart towards a parent or a child is actually stepping back. This is how I often can initiate metta towards people closest to me, is instead of thinking of someone as your parent, can they be a friend for a second? With their own decisions to make and their own mistakes to make and their own views to find out, can you give them the gift of their own agency and freedom? And metta is like a string between you and them. If you're too close, it goes slack and there's no note. But if you pull back just a little, it becomes taut and the note is pure and resonant. So often this motion of pulling back into transcendent right view, of seeing beyond all those conditions, is exactly the motion that needs to be moved towards. And the Tibetan view that all beings are your mothers, and what could be more beautiful? And to know when we can let go of those relationships, in the sense of attaching to them for a moment. Someone asked recently, Mechi Panyasiri, I get angry at my husband a lot. And Mechi Panyasiri said, look, can you just think of him as your friend? You're two human beings living together. You're both going to mess up. You need to talk to each other. And just a sense of a load off in that moment. We also know of a man who, when his son graduated high school, he said, I'm retiring from being your father now. Like, I want to continue to be in your life however you see me, as however you want me in your life, but I don't want you to feel obligated and bound by those same dynamics always. Tell me how you want me to be in your life. And you can sense the sense of release and spaciousness in those motions of heart. It lets the self untangle. It lets us move towards a wider vision, and that's where love manifests, in that space. You open the palm and it fills with sunlight. And the concept of, that's a rough overlay with, I'm touching on how this manifests a little bit in society and these social dynamics, but also in our personal lives. But the same kind of interesting paradox plays out in the concept of privilege and blessing. And there are real discrepancies and inequalities and violence in the world that we need to address. And as a community, I hope we can do that effectively with care. And I think it's also worth speaking to the Buddha's paradigm in terms of what blessing is as well. Where the Buddha talked about 4 kinds of karma, where he said there's bright karma leading to bright result, there's dark karma leading to dark result, there's both bright and dark leading to both bright and dark result, and there's neither bright nor dark leading to the end of karma. And that 4th, most of us fall squarely in the 3rd, we're a nice hodgepodge of bright and dark, but that 4th type of karma leading to the ending of karma, that's the karma of the Noble Eightfold Path. And what transforms any moment into a moment of the path? It's right intention, yoniso manasikara, attention to, and the Buddha talked about 3 factors swirl around every path factor: right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. And if every action is circumscribed by those 3, if we come to every action with looking to how can I move towards breadth of heart, how can I let go of suffering, how can I do my duty, balancing right, transcendent and mundane right view. This is the amazing thing, is every moment of past karma can be transmuted into karma of the path. Every moment. there's a wonderful quote by Longpo Liam where he says, "There are no obstacles in practice, only worthy adversaries." And the idea that each action can become, every moment can become the path. And that this is true blessing. Because some of the greatest masters have, you read their biographies and you realize it's the challenges they've come to that have let them transcend self and selfishness. And that if we can truly orient our lives towards the imperfections, the disjuncts in that life, then it can become a vehicle for transcendence. And I've never seen a limit to how deep that paradigm can go, that as deeply as we're able to turn towards the First Noble Truth, to comprehend and let go of its cause of craving, that as deep as we go into that, that's how deeply we can let go into transcendence. And this is the spiral staircase up and down. And as to this blessing, and it's interesting to speak about in so many ways, we are so blessed and privileged. And sometimes I feel like if we have only that narrative, we forget the full scope and don't give allowance for that full scope of what a human experience in America right now can be. And just the fact that stepping into these circles of practitioners, so many are in deep depression, so many are suicidal or touching that realm of thought. And I remember this community of workers in a shanty near the monastery I lived at in Thailand. And this is not to minimize their poverty, and it's not to say we should not work to alleviate that, but just that many of them were much happier, had much brighter hearts than many of the people I meet today. And just to complicate this view a little bit, to say that the privilege of the path, having come into contact with these lucid and beautiful teachings, we have such resources that are so rare, and to really take note of that and to understand it as a route towards forgiveness. We often fault those around us for not living up to the standards we've placed on them, but can we understand that if we, with all these resources, these teachings, this practice, have such trouble living up to our own standards, can we not forgive others who do not have those resources? Can we not understand how they are in a different spot? And we had a community member some time ago, and they were coming to the community, displaying all these very strange behaviors. It was baffling and frustrating. And then we learned from some people who'd been close to this person for some time that they just had a terrible car accident, that they were having trouble with any basic tasks, let alone integrating into a complicated community. And just the sense of perception shifting immediately from exasperation, frustration, to just compassion. Oh, of course. And it's not that we're, I'm not sure I'm pulling this one off, but I'm not comparing people who haven't had access to Buddhist teachings to, people who've suffered deep trauma in this way, but just that the shift in perspective from an implied avarice and ignorance to understanding truly we all want to be happy, and everything we do that is not aligned with that is just from avidya, from not knowing. And there's a route to compassion. And the privilege and blessing we have in these teachings. The Buddha said there are 8 unfortunate circumstances in the world. 1, a blessed one, a Tathagata, has arisen and taught the Dhamma, but one is reborn in a hell realm and so does not hear the Dhamma. This is the first unfortunate circumstance. The second, a Tathagata has arisen, taught the Dhamma, but one is reborn in the realm of hungry ghosts, as an animal, as a long-lived God. A lot of Buddhist cosmology in there, people. Or one is reborn in a land where the Dhamma is not known and does not get to hear the teaching. This is another unfortunate circumstance. Or a Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma. One is reborn in a country where that teaching is taught, but one holds wrong view and so does not listen. Or one is not prepared to hear the teaching, not capable of hearing the teaching and so does not listen. These are the 8 unfortunate circumstances. Or one is reborn in the right place with right view and the capability of hearing, but a Tathagata has not arisen in the world and has not taught the Dhamma. This is the final unfortunate circumstance. Practitioners, there is one fortunate circumstance. A Tathagata has arisen in the world. He has taught the Dhamma. One is reborn in a place where it is taught. One has right view. One has the faculties to learn and hear the Dhamma, and one hears it. This is the one fortunate circumstance in the world. So welcome to that one fortunate circumstance. And once again, it's the paradox where the Buddha holds up these teachings which sound so brutal on their outset, those 5 recollections, death contemplation, but with death contemplation, it's paired with gratitude, where you think, how lucky, how blessed I am to have even this long, even this one breath to practice the Dhamma. A feature of a community that's practicing well, that's looking towards transcending selfish desire, selfish identity, is a deep, profound, and heartfelt attunement to the careful conditions of this realm. And Ajahn Buddhadasa said, Dhamma is duty. And how we will know if this community is practicing right is if we can both hold the truth of a shared humanity and a shared apex of spirit, while also paying careful attention and holding carefully the conditions which we all come here with, the different personalities, the different pasts, the different histories, the different identities, making room for them, welcoming them, and noticing whenever the heart strays from that. This can be a space where all are welcome and cared for and honored, and we want to make room for that and steer towards it. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll run the mic over to you. Jen.
So I hear right view, I hear right, I hear wrong, I hear good Dhamma, or karma, dark karma. But I push against that because of what I see as more true is that Z-axis, or that letting go of the dark and light karma. And so with these notions of duty for right or good, it gets too strong. And then there's the judgment that comes in. And if I let go, the more I let go, the more right, there we go, the more true it feels.
No, it's a great point. And translation of all these teachings is very fraught into a Judeo-Christian context that's touched us all in many good ways. Profound gratitude for many of the spiritual threads that have been given to us. But the Pali word sama ditti, sama sankappo, that we translate as right, it's a word that's also resonant with the concepts of harmony, with balance, and sometimes those are much more resonant ways of speaking about it. So I agree, and sometimes translating it as harmonious makes sense to me, but it's not totally perfect with the Pali also, so I feel sometimes a little bit worried about it. But I really agree in the sense of the motion of heart people come to with right and wrong as moderns, with the self-critical bent there's such violence in it. I really agree. And yes. One interesting thing is when the Buddha's talking about how you evaluate a teacher, he said you should see if they're restrained and virtuous through fear or not through fear. And one of the ways you see they're restrained through fear is if they disparage others and exalt themselves. And for me, it's an interesting thing because at first, swimming against the stream and coming into the contact with these teachings, it's like the heart's pendulumed. And there's a lot of selfing that it just happens. Like you're trying to alter this whole trajectory. And I see as often part of that motion is pushing back against others, and not in a good way. It just happens. And I think one can expect that motion of the heart and exactly be very cautious of it because it's not a correct motion of the heart. The Buddha always talks, whenever he talks about cultivating right morality in oneself, he says one should not exalt oneself and disparage others for that. So always there's this, it's like a J stroke on a canoe. You paddle, but then you always keep the paddle in a little longer, evening it out. And like that for me is the Buddha's addendum every time. Remember this tendency to push and pull yourself. And no, you're totally right to point that out. And I'd say we can all expect that. We're imperfect beings, most of us. And part of meditation is seeing that ugliness and that mar every time and just letting go of it more and more and one beautiful thing of having spiritual community is you have to crystallize the self less to keep the path, which means you have to push against others conceptually less. You're held by the community, so it lets you let go of that push and pull, which is good. So thank you for pointing that out, Jen. Let's do online, although we can't see you, but please, first person online. Marilyn or Mary? Marilyn.
Marilyn. Thank you, Ajahn. I wanted to thank you for starting off chanting the 5 subjects for frequent recollection. We've done that in our meditation group in Canmore for years. It was always the first chant we chanted, and then we would choose a different one. But I had a really bad accident. I was actually at Birken, and I fell and had a concussion. And I haven't recovered to where I was before. And I realized that I chanted that chant for years and never listened to the words. And how I've had a practice for a number of years, and you think you're progressing, and then something happens, and you can't understand or deal with what it is because it was very limiting. I wasn't able to practice for a long time, and becoming more aware of it and saying, yeah, well, I've got some gray hair. I guess I'm right moving along in that time slot has been a bit liberating, to start paying attention and being awake because, the state of the concussion, I was so bad for a couple of years. It was very difficult to do anything. I just use my breath to bring me back, but I really couldn't sit and do a long meditation. And now, also with ahimsa here, so my practice has been refocused a little and doing way better. But just how you can be lazy, think you're going along doing things, and realize, you aren't. So I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. I think a lot of us can have that conceit. It's inevitable where we think, okay, we're practicing with dukkha, I'm working with it. But every now and again, something comes along and shatters the facade, and you realize, oh, samsara is not a little bit broken. It's really broken. It's really broken. And in that realization is a reckoning, an understanding of the full catastrophe, and the most deep compassion you can imagine, all at once. And just to keep an eye out, like noticing blood clots, the wound will close because we can't sustain that all the time. But in those moments where it shatters again, to really understand that even though you may not have been listening to the words deep down every time, you had the framework ready. And when you see what practice means. It's when people encounter death or loss like that. And some people, if you don't have something equivalent to the Four Noble Truths, it's hard not to break. What do you do with that? So the Dalai Lama speaks about, his meditation practice is preparing for death. And that's what many of us are doing, is learning to let go. And yeah, just thank you for sharing that. And the body is one of the biggest reckonings. So, and I've seen, we have a practitioner on Bainbridge who, she had an autoimmune response where it destroyed her mental faculties for a time. She would read a document at work and not be able to understand it. And then she realized it was a document she'd written. Mm-hmm. And she had to pull back completely to just practicing gently. And she's one of the most luminous beings I've met as a lay practitioner. She used dark karma and changed it into neither bright nor dark. It's the alchemy of the Four Noble Truths. So way to go with that one. And
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it hasn't stopped. There's still things popping up, and I just think, oh, there's another little karmic hit. Okay, I'm gonna stay with me. But thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah, the four recollections, the five recollections. The first four are the situation: birth, age, death, loss. The fifth is the escape hatch. We are the owners of our karma. We can change the mind. So maybe another one online, Kabir? Kathy.
Thank you, Ajahn. I like to read history, and recently I've been reading a history book about sometime back in the previous century, kind of the early part. And then I got a bit turned off. It was quite fascinating, but I got turned off because they are living remotely in a very wild area, and there's a lot of trapping of animals going on. But initially, there were no animals to trap because the beaver had disappeared due to the fur trade. And so this person had the clever idea to restore beaver dams, which would restore the beavers, which would bring back many of the creatures. And it happened. And the land flourished, the creatures flourished, and the humans were, because this was the only way they could support themselves, they needed food and they needed clothing. So they were killing these animals for that purpose. So I find, I'm not quite sure how, so then I think of the karmic cost of that, but then this was how they lived. They lived where there was no store. I mean, they did have a store to go to, a post where they could sell their stuff, but they couldn't go to the grocery store and buy their food and their clothing. So this is how our countries were developed initially by people that did this. So now when I read history, I have this in my mind, so I'm just not sure how to quite hold it.
Thank you. I think perhaps how I could say it's most relevant to all of our lives is to note that to keep the precepts requires often us to not put ourselves in situations where we will have to break them, and that includes certain careers, certain places of responsibility where it's expected. As to the exact situation of the settlers, and if they had choice to be there or not, that's a very complicated picture, and throughout most of history and most people's lives, there's definitely a mix of good and bad karma. And it sounds like it would have been very hard for someone born in that circumstance to avoid killing, although, there are stories of past life stream enterers who've achieved some level of enlightenment, who've been born into nomadic families that hunt for a living, and they just refuse to kill. It's just, people know that this person just isn't going to be good for the hunt. And not to say everyone would have the strength of, to do that, or, the impulse to. But yeah, that's a complicated situation, and most people do have a mix of good and bad. I can say how it's relevant for us is, to look with compassion on all beings, and most of us are born into imperfect circumstances where we're bent and moved and encouraged towards non-perfect sila. And then for ourselves to just note that when you create a world of a career, of a responsibility, it's really important to make sure you're not stepping into a world where breaking precepts is going to be expected and there's going to be that pressure. So you might know a certain career or promotion comes with a strong impulse that you're going to fudge the books a little bit or something like that. And just to know, or if you have to step up to your, if you're invited to step up into your housing committee for your housing complex, but you know you're going to have to sign off on fumigating ants, maybe it's something you want to avoid doing. So I know that's not the perfect answer, but perhaps it's the one I can give right now and the most relevant for this. I think we should begin to wrap stuff up.